Welcome to the Sheffield Sunday As Bill Sees It meeting. This is a main share meeting, and today it is with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome Herb Kay from California, who's come to share for about 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for general sharing or if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you, Herb. It's wonderful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Oh, you're on mute, Herb. You're on mute, Herb. You're on mute.
There we go. I think you can hear me now. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join this group. I was very cautious about saying yes. It's 5 o'clock in the morning here, but I could do this every once in a while. Some parts of the definition of willing to go to any lengths. My name is, I think I said Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is February 21st, 1984. So I've been at this for a while, and I've taken it very seriously. It wasn't my idea to go into Alcoholics Anonymous. It wasn't my idea to quit drinking. It was the staff's idea, a staff of a hospital that my wife was in for her drinking. We knew, she knew that she had a problem, but we didn't know what the problem was. Fortunately, in those days, 1984, there was a very positive attitude in our area about recovery and recovery, professional recovery, and a very wise structure in the institutions, the professional recovery institutions, that included the individual that had the problem, but also insisted on including the family members. So I would go to that hospital program 3 nights a week, bringing our 3 children, who are now adults, of course, and we got information for the very first time. There are so many things that I want to share, some of which I will share. Over a journey of the first 10, 12 years, because it's my journey that reflects an aspect of that reading. Although the reading really is addressed to the conscious agnostic and atheist, I selected it because it might be helpful to people here because of my kind of unique experience, an unconscious agnosticism. I didn't know that I didn't know. It's not meant to be cute, that phrase. It's not meant to get particular attention other than the attention of perhaps some type of identification. When people hear it, sometimes they finally can put words to their experience, because it's not an uncommon experience in human development, let alone in the recovery thawing out of addicts. And I use the term addicts because my message now, and has been for 30 years, is to anybody who wants a spiritual awakening, not just alcoholics, but not just addicts, to all human beings. Now, I could not have talked this way, obviously, then, but the hospital staff, asked me to stop drinking to support her recovery. No problem. I had stopped many times for a variety of reasons. January was a good start to the year, a resolution. Lent My religious tradition is and was Catholic. And I would stop for Lent regularly. I had just concluded a 90-day abstinence because I was in a self-help program, some program of human development that promised some type of happiness. So I was able to stop drinking. I was willing, I actually would say, willing to stop drinking. And I'm wonderfully humbled by the fact that that was my last drink, February 21st, 1984. Not because I made a resolution to stop forever, not because I went to AA, not because I prayed, not because I knew I had a problem, none of that. But very grateful for the grace that gave me that abstinence, a gift that has never been challenged. I've never had an inclination since that day. I've thought about it many times. The key word for me probably is willingness. It's in the reading, even at the end of the material, and it's at the end of Appendix 2, which Bill distinguishes between a spiritual awakening and a spiritual experience. Willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness. Indispensable. Willingness. The man who helped me the most was the man who took me through the steps the very first time, but I was 5 years sober. In that hospital program in 1984, they asked me to take a look at my behavior and my connection to my history of drinking. If any of you have a problem with alcohol or drugs, certainly, and have struggled with it in terms of the first step, that was my first step, to actually consciously look at not my general autobiography, but my autobiography related to alcohol itself. When did I drink? What did I drink? How did it impact me? Beginning at 12 years old, going up to 43 when I was struck sober in 1984. And that began to give me a connection of the dots that I had never had before. I'd never thought about my first drink, which was a drunk, and then periodic drinking that ended up in a drunk, and that alcohol was connected to almost every problem I had. And I had never seen that. Now, I was not surprised. My father was an alcoholic. My wife's an alcoholic. All of her relatives are alcoholic. My friends are alcoholic. Some of them are in AA. I didn't know much about it. I wasn't surprised that I was alcoholic. I was startled, stunned that I had never seen it. Connecting to the agnosticism and the belief and the reading of today, I believed. My religious tradition is and was Catholic, as I mentioned, all the way through college. At 17, I left high school to go to a monastery to study to be a Catholic priest, and I was there for 7 years. I didn't have any problem with God. Even when I left, I hung up my cassock. After 7 years of meditation every day, after 7 years of poverty, chastity, and obedience, after 7 years of silence. Yeah, it was a monastery of silence. And I didn't meditate again for another 25 years. Now, I only realized that at 10 years of sobriety, what I'm about to share, and that was given to me as a gift of working the steps with a man who had a precise understanding, a deep, deep understanding of the application of the steps to his personal life, and had an experience. That didn't start in 1984. I went to a meeting of AA at the suggestion of the staff, and I got traction in that meeting, and they said, get a sponsor when I admitted that I was an alcoholic, because I saw the drama. That personal autobiography showed me all the drama, and I concluded 502s and jails and hospitals and trouble here and trouble there. I'm an alcoholic. I was an alcoholic for 5 years on step 1 based on drama. I got a sponsor. He said, work the steps. I did on my own without his help, because he didn't offer help. He didn't know that he didn't know much about the big book and or the step process, and or that his job was to guide me through the steps. He heard my 5th step. He guided me a little bit on the 9th step, but my 9th step was, I'm sorry. And that was a repeated phrase with very little meaning, because my behavior didn't change. I didn't know that my behavior should change. I didn't know that my behavior could change. I didn't know how to change my behavior. None of that was a conscious awareness at all. Even though I became a psych major, graduate education in psychology. I met a man after a meeting where he had shared for 5 minutes, and he had shared differently. It was his words, certainly. It was his eyes that had a light. It was his stature that had comfort. It was his poise that had humility. But it was the tone in his voice that was a magnet to me. And my whole being pointed to, I recently heard the phrase North Star, and I love that kind of a metaphor. I was attracted to him like a magnet. And we sat down and we discussed. He asked me a lot of questions, and at the end of the 45 minutes, he said, Herb, he said, yeah, and you have to look at me if you would, please, because he said this in a public restaurant. He said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. You have a lot of academic knowledge, but it's never been converted in your heart to your feet, and you have not changed. You think you're a Renaissance man. You're actually a Neanderthal. I mean, he was not trying to hurt my feelings and not trying to be brutal. He was just clear in telling me the truth. And I was willing to hear it. And I knew that he knew something that I didn't know. And he agreed to take me through the steps. And I had a very powerful experience with many of the steps, but not steps 2 and 3. Because of my background, I have a graduate education in philosophy and theology from the monastery. Chapter 4 was interesting, but kind of juvenile, kind of kindergarten stuff. I mean, my judgment at the time, of course. And his leadership in that area didn't open up the door to me. But I nevertheless had that spiritual awakening that Appendix 2 refers to, that gradual, glacially slow thawing out. And yet inevitable thawing out at the end of it, finishing the 9th step, realizing for the first time that I had been changed. I mean, I hope you're hearing the vocabulary. I came in there not expecting anything. I didn't know what actually the purpose of the steps were, nor that change was possible. But steps 6 and 7 became instruments of radical and permanent change, because I understood them and I applied them, and he gave me a piece of information that I hadn't had, and that's not in the big book. He added accountability. Not only do I do an inventory and own my warped instincts and my demented thinking, totally responsible, I tell him every day what I'm praying for, realizing I'm powerless over my character defects, but I'm responsible for my behavior. That was information that he gave me to clarify the use of step 6 and 7. Powerless, but responsible. And then he said, and call me every day to tell me what you're thinking and feeling and doing. And of course, it's the awareness of my instincts and the desire to have my behavior reflect more human behavior rather than this animal behavior of reaction rather than response. And prayer, because I'm powerless, absolutely. My willingness and God's grace, absolutely, as I mentioned in my opening comments. But it was the accountability that I believe put me past the goal line of actually effecting and realizing the change in my behavior. To tell him every day what I'm actually praying about and what I'm doing. So I had a very powerful transformative experience, a radical change in my thinking and feeling and behavior, which is in fact what Appendix 2 describes and is the intent of a spiritual awakening and a spiritual experience. A change. It's that simple. And it's the promise of the 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. Now, I didn't put all of that together, nor could I have articulated it at the time. I can do that now in the rearview mirror as I've reviewed it and now talked about it quite a bit. 3 years later, because of some difficulty, not relevant here, I went through the steps again with a very, very effective teacher, sponsor, step guide. I call them step guides because they weren't sponsors. They were like a project manager. I engaged them at the beginning to take me through the steps. And when I was concluded with the 9th step, that was the end of the project. And I had another powerful experience with this man in different areas in the steps. Again, that's not that relevant for this conversation. But then again, I blew by steps 2 and 3 because I know that I know. And it turns out that I think that I know, and I'm deluded about that in terms of steps 2 and 3. Then I met a man at 10 years of sobriety. And I'm not driven now by any suffering. My life has reached a level of harmony that I had never anticipated, but had always read about as the ideal of good therapy. A life that flourishes, and my life was really flourishing. But I knew that there was an instinct in me. I had a consistent daily meditation practice at that time, thanks to this man, unpacking pages 85 and 88 in the big book in terms of meditation, directed thinking. And again, gave me the word that's not in the big book that was the key that opened the door to meditation. How to do it, why to do it, but mostly how to do it. And that is, he said, ask God to direct your thinking. That's a direction in the book upon awakening. He says, it's a prayer, Herb. God, please direct my thinking. We both laughed at the simplicity of that. And then Bill in the big book says, think about the 24 hours ahead. Consider your plans. 2 different words, 2 different processes. Again, I'm not going to spend much time commenting on it because it's not the relevance here of what I really want to communicate. But it opened the door to meditation. And 25 years after I left the monastery, 1989, I began a daily practice of meditation. And I believe it was that attempt and practice of consciousness that allowed me to continue the journey so effectively in terms of the second journey through the steps and then this third journey that I really want to talk about here in 1994. It was a contemplative journey. It was 2 years. I met with this man every week. We went over the big book. He gave me an assignment. We went over every paragraph, every sentence, sometimes every phrase and every word. But when we began, he did something that now I do and incorporated in the work that I do when I take people through the steps, and that is convert the suggestions in the big book about setting aside your old ideas. The big book is peppered with that phrase in different words, but especially How It Works, chapter 5, page 58. Let go of your old ideas. The result was nil unless we do. I mean, I didn't understand those words for 10 years until, in fact, this man said, I want you to pray for spiritual intervention, not pray that you can set it aside, Herb. We don't have the power to do that. But pray that the Spirit enter your heart, enter your mind, enter your soul. The Spirit, whatever it is that you believe in or think you believe in, to open your mind and open your heart and deliver you to a place that you don't even know exists. Well, I thought he was being poetic and in some form of hyperbole salesmanship because he lived on the west side and that's the way they think over there. And I thought, yeah, woo, good, I'll do this. But I began doing that. And I had a whole new experience with step 1. I had not seen, because Bill doesn't structure the big book this way, unmanageability. Bill ends his discussion on step 1 on page 43, and all of that material is about addiction. My body has a problem, an allergy. Once I take a drink, I cannot not drink. And my mind has an obsession and a delusion. And once I stop, I cannot stay stopped. Either chronic alcoholic or periodic alcoholic, doesn't matter. Once I stop, I cannot stay stopped, and that was my experience. 2 different experiences going through the steps 2 different times. But this 3rd time, this man revealed to me unmanageability contained in chapter 4 with those bedevilments on page 52, behavior. I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. I felt like a puppet on strings, and I had that awareness because of step 4 previously. And it had begun to change. But now I understood pages 60 to 62 in chapter 5. Bill warms us up to step 3 with taking a look at all of that egocentric, manipulative behavior to get our own way. And he calls it the root of the problem, the spiritual malady, and concludes on page 62 at the end of that 2nd paragraph that we're powerless over our managing our own lives. We're powerless over managing our own lives. We can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. I'm quoting. This self-centeredness. Well, that was a brand new experience. It shook me to the core, and I could see the spiritual malady for the very first time. This restless, irritable, and discontent, this deep thirst, this deep hunger, manifested certainly in addicts in a very visible way, but manifested in all human beings. And that's why Bill could say in the preface to the 1st edition, our way of living may have its advantages for all, not just all alcoholics, and not certainly all addicts. He didn't have that perspective yet. He meant all human beings, unmanaged, because this is a human development process regardless of your condition, addict or not addict. This is the core problem for humanity, is this restless, irritable, and discontent. We want to manage reality so that we get what we want or what we expect or what we believe we deserve or are entitled to. It was a wonderful spiritual awakening at the time, and I, again, didn't know that I was having it because it was so different. It was interesting to me. I love new experiences. But then, and this is the point now, the total point of my coming here today to talk about the reading. he asked me to enter into step 2 with the set-aside prayer. Open my heart, deliver me to a place I don't even know existed. And he had me write out, this is what the assignment, write out your belief. What is it that you believe? Well, that was an easy task for me. He gave me a week to do it. I came back and read it to him, about a page and a half of just wonderful philosophy and theology and somewhat poetic. It was well written. He said I should publish it. I think it was tongue-in-cheek, but be that as it may. Then he asked me the second question, and this was the one, I get emotional, that pierced the veil. And I didn't know that I had a veil. He said, and how do you behave in light of what you just wrote about how you believe? Go home and write about how you behave. Because now I had been given the set-aside prayer, and I had been given the experience of unmanageability, restless, irritable, and discontent, the core being self-centeredness. And I could see that, oh man, I'm a practical agnostic. Not intellectual, not emotional. No, I had a deep belief. I had an active and conscious and consistent practice of meditation. I believed, but it wasn't transferred into my behavior. Once again, the head to the heart to the feet in any consistent manner. And I was now ready for chapter 4, step 2. And he took me in it, answering the questions that are posed there. I had never seen the questions because chapter 4 to me was just something that was easily read and easily talked about because, I have this background. Page 53, God is or God isn't, what is your choice? Now, over time, I have developed some, I believe, accuracy that has really helped me understand the difference between steps 2 and 3. Bill asks us to make a choice in step 2, and he asks us to make a decision in step 3. Different words, I believe, a different implication. In step 2, he said, God is or God isn't, what is your choice? God either is everything or God is nothing. Essentially saying, either God is or isn't, black and white, and if God is everything, or there is no God. And I meditated and wrote about that and thought about that, and over the decades, actually, it has become a much more relevant meditation than it was even then. But at that time, I could see that I was an agnostic because I didn't operate on a daily basis aware of that presence, nor was I that consistent with my meditation, although fairly consistent. And it wasn't a very deep process. It was much more a self-development consciousness practice, more in the line of psychology and Buddhism than it was of the actual need for a active relationship. Bill says there on, I think it's page 55, that we establish this relationship, an act of faith. And so I had to look up the word faith. Faith isn't knowledge or certitude. Faith isn't a feeling. It's a choice of my free will. I had just spent 10 years having a progressive experience of no choice, My body is powerless, allergy. My mind is powerless, obsession, with regard to addiction. And now I see that my will is powerless in terms of unmanageability. I will do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do, despite knowing better. I don't do better. And some of the time, I don't even know better. But the ultimate measure is I don't do better on a consistent basis. I'm not living up to my understanding of principles in my life. We are confronted with the question of faith. I confronted myself. What is it? It's a choice. But that's it. It's very empty. It's very thin. It's very invisible. It's got no substance to it. It's just, I choose. Not because I know. I choose. Not because I feel. I choose. Not because I've been told by my tradition or my sponsor or my meetings or the book. I personally choose an act of faith. Very empty, very dark. But then this man took me into step 3. For the very first time, now that I have a conscious contact with the mystery, that was my summary of sort of my overall experience with step 2. That's why Bill said, as you understand it, in the last 5 years only, my consciousness and my vocabulary changes over time. In the last 5 years, I changed that phrase. Bill was a gift to us in the big book who said, God as we understand it. That's a real gift. But for me, it's God as I don't understand it. I will never understand it. IT, capital I, capital T. I will never understand this reality that I have chosen exists. Because my thinking and all of my experience is limited, finite, and I'm trying to embrace infinity by definition. Whatever it is, it had no beginning and it has no end. If it exists, it's eternal. Well, I can mouth the words, but I do not really understand it because it's not experiential in that sense of science or human grasp. I'm okay with that. That's why I use the term mystery now. Or spirit. I really like the word spirit. It has a root in the Greek spiros, meaning breath or wind. This is like trying to capture the wind. And this is like elusive and yet very real, very present. He took me into step 3. A decision to turn. So many people use the term surrender for step 3. Surrender is a wonderful word. It's not in the big book, in the first 163 pages, or the Roman numerals. The term surrender is not there. But it's a wonderful word for step 1. Complete defeat. I give up. I implode into powerlessness progressively over time, as I articulated. The drama, then the body, then the mind, then the will, progressively seeing pathetic human being who cannot really awaken on their own and sustain it. At least that's my interpretation of my experience. I need help. Help is available. Steps 1, step 2. And I need a relationship. I want a relationship. I can have a relationship with this power in the universe. Star Wars, Force, the Force. a decision to turn is not a surrender. It's a ferocious act of my will, because it's a commitment to action, a commitment to do steps 4 through 9. That's how he says it. Once we do step 3, he said it'll have no permanent effect unless we at once jump into the real work of steps 4 through 9. Up till then, it's merely been an experience and an awareness and a choice and a decision. But that decision of step 3 is a commitment to action. And although it says a decision to turn, my experience consistently, not my awareness of my experience, but my experience as I look back over my shoulder now, is that I was turned. That combination of my willingness to take action and being delivered to a place that I didn't even know existed. And then the best part about step 3, everything I've said has been a real good part of step 3, but the best part was he made it very clear that Bill is inviting us to establish a relationship. On pages 62 and 63, Bill gives us 5 different relationships. He doesn't say it as clearly as I'm saying it. The interpretation by this man and now by me is that he was inviting us to establish a relationship. Do you want a relationship with God as Father, or as Director, or as fill in the blank, this man said to me. What do you want? What do you need? Which then supplemented my work on step 2. At the conclusion of step 2, he asked me 2 questions. What do you want in God? What do you want as a concept? What do you need as a concept? Those are 2 different words and 2 different kind of dimensions of my choice. What do you want? What do you need? And I was able to write out my concept at that time, my concept and my choice about concept. And then when I got to step 3, I was able to use those as the foundation for and the springboard for a relationship. And I wanted and needed at that time a rehabilitated concept of father. I had had a father who was an alcoholic. I had made amends and got free of all of that anger and resentment through what I now call a forgiveness process, steps 4 through 9, a wonderful forgiveness process where I was able to release. Look at my hand again. Look up the definition of forgiveness in the dictionary. A decision to release. Now, I didn't know that at that time. It was 10 years later that I began to formalize my understanding of forgiveness from a psychological standpoint, from a human development standpoint, and see that it's very parallel, identical, parallel process to the process of steps 4 through 9 in the Big Book, a spiritual process. One of my colleagues now is a Stanford professor who wrote the book on forgiveness, Forgive for Good, Dr. Fred Luskin, if you're interested. But my point here is that it was about choosing a relationship. And I chose Father. As biblical as that might be, as religious as that might be, that was what I wanted. That's just what I needed at that time as a personal relationship with this mystery. And he was very clear. He said, your words and your relationship will change as you do. It doesn't matter. You just go with the flow. And I did, and it has changed. And that's why today I use light or spirit or mystery to try to kind of take away all of the anthropomorphic characteristics of a God of my not understanding. As I had a whole new energy toward an understanding of the 3rd step prayer, when I prayed it, I had a whole new experience. I was ready to jump the cliff, the chasm that Bill talks about. that's in front of us at the end of this decision process. And then I saw and I experienced that the loving hand of God delivered me to the other side. I didn't leap the chasm. I was carried across to a whole new relationship. And it literally, in my meditation that morning and doing the third step prayer on my own, I did pray it with my respective sponsors and step guides formally, like that book suggested, but I did it on my own in a meditation. And it was one of those spiritual experiences where I actually literally felt carried across. That's the metaphor or the image that I've just indicated. Carried across the chasm to the other side, to a relationship with this mystery. Thank you so much.